Let's talk about Mesocycle Construction. I'm sure you're thinking, man, that's something I'd really like to learn about. And you know what? If you've been following my channel, you probably do. If you haven't already, by the way, subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to get to 100 subs at the time of this video. Hopefully, if you're watching it later, I'm like 1,000. That'd be awesome, right? The ultimate goal, of course. But like this video if you like it at the end too. And check out my library of journal club, book club reviews, all kinds of good stuff. Be sure to check out my book as well in the video description. Let's get into this topic of this video. And I made some pictures for you. I thought that'd be fun. Let's look at mesocycle construction. Now, first of all, if you don't know what a meso is, there's a lot of ways to define these layers of periodization. Some people don't like periodization. Some people think it's stupid, and some people think, right? This is what I found with the field of exercise and sports science. Tools. Everything's a tool, right? What that means is that periodization is also a tool, okay? There's times not to use it. In a beginner, you can basically you have a linear ramp and just ride that wave, baby, until they start to stall out. Then the types of periodization you would use then would fit the individual, whether it's an athlete or not. So, if somebody is nearing their genetic potential, which is rare, like most people are intermediate lifters if they've been lifting for a while. It's very rare to find an advanced lifter. Somebody could have even truncated potential and strength or whatever, or in size, but especially in strength, and they might be slowing down. And they might be nearing advanced, but still, it's very unusual. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, or you're not one of those people, or you're not working with those type of people. I'm just saying it's in the percentage of allotment of people that are either beginners, which means they have a lot of upside. Look at my review on Penley's method book for just kind of what I'm talking about. But they have a lot of upside. Intermediate person who has times where they'll see gains, but it might take a little more stimulus accumulation, more volume accumulation, right? Remember, volume builds, volume kills. And then advanced person is going to need a significant amount of volume in order to move the needle, right? And this is where a careful planning has become. So I always tell my students, the more advanced or more complex the individual, and sometimes when referred to athletes, the more complicated the program. The basic or simpler the athlete, right, in terms of who they are, the simpler the program. You don't have to get overly complex when you're writing programs or following a program. If you're just starting out, even if you're an intermediate person, you don't need to pick up super training and try to apply super training to your programming. Those were for advanced athletes. Intermediate to advanced, definitely advanced. Okay, those great books, by the way. Those are fantastic theoretical books. But I remember reading a lot of these when I was first learning. It was like 100 years ago. And as I read all these books by Bondarchuk and Cern and all these great things and great information in them, I couldn't help but wonder, I'm getting the same results from simple programming. It's because of the individuals working with. And the individuals they're working with is very different. They're working with athletes going to the Olympic Games. And, I'm working with individuals that are just starting out or maybe have 3 years of experience of training, or university level weightlifters, maybe national level, borderline national or national level weightlifters. It's a different athlete than you'll find with Verko Shansky working with Sergey Bubka, right? I mean, this is a different. Those people I don't know about, but this is a different configuration. Okay, all that to say, let's look at some pictures and talk about how you might structure mesocycle configuration. Again, these mesos, I didn't really define it. Mesos usually considered a week of training, a block that's roughly around that time frame. Okay, and so what would a weekly assignment look like? Assignment of what? We'll talk about it in a second too. But what are the shapes of it? Do you just flat load, right? You just say 80% across the board for 4 weeks. Volumes is roughly the same. I'm doing 3x6 every day at back squat or every Monday, and that's it. Okay. Should the shape change, right? Depending on your goals. Let's talk about those things. And we'll get into this a little bit. Again, I'm defining here a mesocycle as roughly 1 month of training. Okay, weekly training, right? How do you chunk out the volume and intensity within a week, and how does that look over a month? All right, if I said, I don't think I said that wrong. Just making sure. You never know. I don't know what date is half time. Okay, so let's get into this a little bit. What I have here is a couple slides with some pictures, and we'll talk about what these are. I also want to mention I have a Patreon page. If you'd like to ask me questions directly, or I also have a weightlifting technique level. If you're interested in that, check out my Patreon page in the link below as well. And certainly all your support as well is very helpful for me to continue to make these videos free of charge. At least, charge you a couple bucks. I think the Patreon level is like $2 or something. I don't know. It's super cheap. Anyway, here we go. So a meso. So what each one of these little blocks represent, so rectangles, is 1 week of training. Okay. Now, as you're looking over here, here's week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What I've done is provided some different configurations for us to look at and to think about. If you haven't seen my video on training theory, you can go back and watch it, and some of this will make a little more sense as well. So let's look at it in the terms of, to start with, in percentages. And percentages are good guides still. I'm not saying you would follow them perfectly. Use RP, RIR, all these different methods of auto-regulating, which I use as well. Fantastic. But in terms of planning, using percentages is very helpful because you know where you're going. And I love pictures. When I first started coaching in particular, in my Excel sheets, when I'd write programs, I don't use them as much anymore because I can kind of visualize them. But if there's a longer program, I might do that. I usually program a meso at a time with a long-range goal in mind. When I mostly work with weightlifters now, but I like to program a little bit with a plan in mind, but again, having the flexibility to adjust things as I see problems that athletes are having with certain things. Anyway, here we go. So let's assume for a minute that this is 75%. And what are we talking about with 75%? These are your major lifts of the week. All right. These are your core lifts. I'm not talking about your trunk. I'm not talking about your abs. I'm talking about your core lifts. So let's just make it simple. Let's say that powerlifting, like the big 3, are your core lifts. Okay. It's, bench, squat, deadlift, right? I know I put those out of order in a competition, but just hear me. Bench, squat, deadlift. Okay. And let's say you will squat on Monday, bench on Wednesday if you're going to do a 3-day program, or, we can, I don't want to get into the weeds on that very much, but you just kind of get the idea. These are your core lifts. I'm not talking about your dumbbell row or your overhead press necessarily. Now, you can plot them, of course, but I find it more helpful. I think most coaches do is use rep ranges there, which are tied to percentages, but I might say this first week, if I did this in a linear fashion like this is designed, is an 8-rep week, right? And then I'm talking about accessory lifts now, like my DB row, my overhead press, whatever I think is important for that individual or yourself. 8 reps, right? And then 6, and then 5, right? Now, obviously, it's biceps curl, or some sort of triceps work. Those rep ranges may not, like I don't want to do 5 reps at a biceps curl necessarily. That's not what I'm really looking for. I want to be in a volume that I can see a little bit of benefit hypertrophy. So again, there's going to be some adjustments that occur here. What I'm thinking about with these blocks are the core lifts, whatever that is. It could be snatch and clean and jerk. I'm also not, if it was a snatch and I'm going to snatch 3 times in a 4-day program, 4 days per week program, I'm not saying that I'm going to snatch at 80% every single lift, but that'll be the average that I use. Now, there's different ways to do this. Some people say 80% is my heaviest day, and then I'll do 75 and 70 or 65 on the other day in some variant. Or I might average, and I might say 85 or 80 is the average. I'm going to have an 85% day, an 80 day, and a 70 day, or a 75% day, however you want to program it. Okay. Usually I drop the lowest day down even more. Again, we can get in the weeds on this. I don't want to do that. I just want to set the tone for what the heck are we looking at when we say 80%? 80% of what? Well, it could be across the big 3 that you're doing 80%. Squat, bench, dead. Every one of them is 80%, and everything else that you're doing, these variants, these supportive exercises, right? If you're doing the tier method, if you're doing west side barbell or whatever it is, well, west side would be a little different. But I mean, you're doing these different percentages, and other exercises might look different, okay? Again, I just want to kind of set, what the heck are we talking about when we're talking about strength right now using percentages, all right? And I'll talk about volume here in a little bit too. All right, let's say 80% is 1 week. Well, how do you get stronger? You do it by lifting more the next week you did last. Now, there's some pieces that go into strength, okay? And I'm not going to get in the weeds on this because I have videos on this as well. There's a neurological component to strength, absolutely. There's a learning from technique to learning how to do synchronization of your motor units and in the muscles themselves, like in your quad, for instance, or something like that, right? There's a lot of coordination that goes on to strength output. There's no doubt about it. Developing rate of force development, myelinations, all these pieces that physiologically happen. On the other side is more the morphological change, and I kind of mentioned myelination a little bit ago, but the changes in the actual muscle cross-sectional area, adding more actin and myosin. You're familiar with how the muscle is constructed, the actual contractile proteins of the muscle, okay? And so, when I say add more weight to the bar, yes, of course, that's how you get stronger, especially neurologically in an acute cycle like this. Accumulated over time, though, is going to be enough volume in order to see changes to the skeletal muscle size. Okay, so it's a combination of the two, especially early on, but over time, it's going to be a little bit more interesting for accumulation. That's why it takes a weightlifter. And again, I'm not going to go into this. I had a video on this already. Functional versus non-functional hypertrophy, which I hate those terms, but the point is that it takes time to build more densely packed muscle than it does muscle that's more like a bodybuilder's muscle, where it's more like the supportive tissue. So anyway, let's look at this. And thinking ahead, you know, in the basic, you know, exercise prescription guidelines, I just need to add more weight to the bar each week, okay? Or at least try to, right? So 80%, and again, depends on who this is, and we have all these variants that this is why coaching is challenging and program is challenging, but 80, 85%, and let's say 90. I said I didn't want to go to 90 yet. Maybe I thought that was too high a percentage. This could be, you know, I could scale this down to 87.5. I like, by the way, those were my favorite cycles. I never would get up, not never. I wouldn't get into 90 until I had to. Okay. And the reason is that when you get up to 90, you start to really see a decline in volume for your average barbell athlete. Now, if we're talking about a rower, that's something different. But your average barbell athlete will see a decline once you hit 90s. I'm not saying you can't do it. I do them with EMOMs. I like doing that kind of stuff. I think it's important, but there's just not enough volume accumulation to see gains. And we see that in the research literature as well, especially, at least in the research specifically that it's pertaining to men. I think it probably holds true for women as well. I do think women need to handle heavier weights more than men do. Some of it could be even sociological with women, not necessarily physiological, just because a lot of women haven't been used to handling weights. That's changing over time. But regardless, that's an observation. That's not from the research literature per se. Okay, so take that for what it's worth. But certainly with men, the 80% range is a sweet spot. And so running provides enough volume and enough practice, if you will, to get neurologically better and to get stronger. And so I could set something up like that. And then I take a deload week here. I'm talking about percentages right now. I could pull back to 80% and then build right back up after 80% so that my deload week would match the week 1 load. All right. And what that does, instead of pulling back too far, which I'll show you here, or pull back more, is that allows me now to step up, right, to a higher. Remember, this is my deload week. This is technically week 1 of the new cycle, which was week 2 previously. 3 and then 4, and then now I might hit 90%. So this could be, I move back to 80, 85. I said 87.5, maybe this is 92.5 or 90. Now I'm to 95, which I wouldn't spend much time at, but it'd say it's a competition run, and then you're going to deload after that. Okay. Notice the deload here percentage is much lower than the first percentage. Now, if we're talking about, and I put these up here to talk about them. All right. I'm not advocating the cycle is perfect or anything like that. I'm just giving you ideas. Pulling back like that is very common to do. I like to do that in competition, especially in weightlifting, and certainly in squat work. There's a time to build volume in the 70s, but I found that hanging in the 80s, again, is a good idea. So if I pulled back here in a deload on the percentage, if I pull back to 70% here, imagine now if I try to rebuild into the next cycle. Okay, if I rebuild in the next cycle, I have to go 70, 75, unless I want to jump on the athlete, which you could, or the individual. I keep saying athlete, but individual back up to 80. So I go from 70 to 80. Okay, that's a big jump in percentages to build back up again. So when a lot of people deload, they pull back the percentage. Remember, volume builds and volume kills. I'm not advocating staying at a high percentage. Let's say this was the high was 90, right? I ended with. I'm not saying stay up there at 90 necessarily for deload, but I would, and the research literature will support me on this, that especially when it comes to strength, is you don't need to pull back the intensity. In fact, you don't want to if you want to preserve strength. It's the volume. Look at my video on tapering. It's the volume that you want to pull down, because thinking about the fitness fatigue model, again, look at that video on training theory. That's what we're trying to get here. Okay. And this was just percentage based. All right. Now, this drop here, okay, if I represent these as percentage based, maybe I'm thinking, okay, if I drew an 85 here, the volume might drop like this. Right. And if we looked over volume over time, right, as the intensity's coming up, the volume either will stay the same depending on what kind of cycle you're in. Certainly as it gets to higher percentages, as it clears 85, the volume is going to start to drop, right? The volume would drop here as well at 80% and stay lower than it was in that first stage. Okay. So let's say volume started here, right? It slowly started coming down, right? And now it's lower than that first one. Why? Because that's how you deload. It's the volume that's important, okay? Now, as I start the next cycle, volume will come up a little bit, but again, over time, it starts to decline as I hit the higher percentages. You can't do, 15 reps at 90. You can try it. 15 reps at 90%. Even if you did like an EMOM or something else, that's a lot of freaking reps at 90%. But you can do 15 reps at, 85%, right? That's the old 3x5 of the 2 warm-up set build-up. That's 5 sets of 5. That's been on forever. Works pretty well, okay? But the next week, it's going to be tough. If this was, let's say this is 90, all right, to hit that, and then 95 or whatever your top is here, that's going to be really hard to hit 15 reps. I would not recommend that, okay? And so that's just hopefully gives you an idea. Like these are intensities here I'm representing. I would keep this intensity high, but if we're thinking about volume, volume is linear declining over time, right? And the volume would come back and then linear declining over time again. Okay, and we want that volume to come down now before the next cycle. Maybe I reset the cycle, maybe I'm in a competition, whatever it may be. Especially if I'm hitting a 95%, you obviously don't want to hang out there. Okay, so that would be more like a peaking type of cycle. But I'm just trying to give you an idea of how this would look if you're interested in this. Over here is what a lot of folks do with percentages, and I kind of already talked about this, is 80, 85, 90, bam, all the way back down to 75, like a hard deload. Now, there's times this may be warranted. If you have an athlete that is just like, or an individual, or you are just, man, I've been training for a long time, I'm hitting a wall, pull both down, all right? But remember, what we're really interested in is the volume. So again, I would go back to an 80% retention of intensity and drop, have the volume fall back down though, all right? And then you do it again here. It's such a big jump to the next cycle if you're trying to build over time, okay? So intensity stays high, volume comes down. Now, if this was hypertrophy cycles, we could be tracking volume now. Okay, volume could be increasing over time. Intensity is going to be dropping, all right? Volume, even with an hypertrophy cycle, good idea to pull that back, okay? Especially, we could quantify this in different ways, a number of sets per central exercises or important movement patterns, or all movement patterns, right? If we're trying to build the whole physique, this could be 5 sets of a particular pattern, whatever that is, right? This could be 7, this could be 9, okay? And you can use 7s and 9s in weight training, it's okay. Right, and then we pull back again down to that 5, or maybe even lower to a 3. Okay, if you start getting some high accumulations of volume, having a significant volume drop here is going to be warranted. I would highly recommend it. Otherwise, you start to pick up joint fatigue, and that's there was an unpublished study. It was years ago by Andrew Fry, who's put out some great research on overtraining back in the 90s. This is old stuff from KU. And it was on palpation of the patella tendon and how that tendon becomes sensitive. I don't think it was published ever. Maybe it was. It was sensitive to, the more trained you got, the more that tendon became sensitive. So the two things I always look for or listen to athletes when I know they're nearing overreaching. Okay, not overtraining. If they're overtrained, I've really screwed up as a coach, or you've screwed up as a person not paying attention. But overreaching, joint pain, right? Achy knees, achy wrists, whatever it is, and then elbows, shoulders, right? And not a catastrophic injury, but just starting to get, and then sleep disturbances start to get a little bit more, right? That's time to really pull back. Maybe you're trying to overreach, and I'll show you in a second. Fine, but just know that you need to deload hard. All right. So let's look at a couple other patterns, and we'll end this video here. I mentioned the overreach cycle. Now notice I really like a 3 build cycle. Okay, I've toyed with other ones. I have a cycle that I like with 2 volume weeks, more hypertrophy type of week. I call it a reload week. It's just playing with names, but reload week, and then a 3-week build up in intensity to a competition meet. That's a nice between meet cycle. All right. So I get the 2 volume weeks, I get a little bit of a recovery in volume, and then I build up the intensity, and then compete. Okay, with a deload week. I found that's a good cycle. Okay, there's nothing magical about that. It's just a mini, right? A mini linear cycle, or if you read a Søren's book, right, his language of transition phases and accumulation and realization, right, all these words, it's the same idea. I mean, I like his books, by the way. Block training. Maybe I'll do a video on those, but block training, it's just basically linear cycles, unless you're trying to specifically work on a variable that needs some budging, and you're talking about an advanced athlete at that point. So let's get back to this. Here's Texas method. This is the Glenn Penley. You'll see this in Joe Ken's book. This is a great peaking cycle. So in a cycle like this might be 80, 85, right? Accumulate a lot of volume, okay? And then if we stuck with the percentage game here, right, we'd come all the way down to maybe 75, like in Joe Ken's book, like 67.5, okay? And then make a big jump, right, up to 90, okay? And you can put our numbers in here, 5%, 7% drop, 7.5% drop here, maybe even more, down to, I mentioned 85 down to 65.5, basically a significant drop, and then a push up here to finish. This is a fantastic cycle. This could be your competition week or your testing week or whatever it is. But I would go back to, again, let's think though about in terms of what's going on volume wise. And is this intensity drop really necessary? Okay, remember what we really need to focus on. Now, if an athlete's beat up, I'm not talking about that. That the intensity might be warranted. But if we put this up to match, you know, not even 85. If you want to take it down to 75, even that's fine. Again, I have a hard time getting out of the 80s when I'm trying to build athletes up. Again, I'm working mostly with weightlifters, so I don't want them to come down too far, because then they lose that ability to stay connected with, you know, technique at a load that they need to move. Okay, so again, going back to the example, what does this look like? 80, 85, maybe back to 80, then I jump to 90. Okay, what am I doing volume wise though? Volume is coming down, and then volume, this is a volume and it really drops. I might still be at 80%, but volume has come down significantly before I come back up. What am I doing here? I'm manipulating the fitness fatigue model. Okay, my fitness is rising. Now I pull the rug out from underneath fatigue. Fatigue drops rapidly. Now I see how my fitness gains realized. This is a taper. Okay, this is fantastic. Now you could do this back-to-back cycling. I mean, I'm not saying this has to be a taper, but this is a good cycle. I like this cycle a lot. Again, I traditionally use this more so with tapering and getting ready for a meet or whatever it might be, but this is fantastic as just a cycle-to-cycle routine. Okay, so I could put another one here, right, with a higher percentage and build these Texas methods up over time. Okay, and I didn't invent that. Glenn Penley did. Joe Ken's used it in his book. I highly recommend this. It's fantastic. All right, again, we have accumulation. This is our hardest week, and I found, you know, when you do three blocks and then the fourth week off, and I've tried doing extra blocks before, like I'm showing you here, and this fourth week is usually abysmal. At least the way that I program, this has been always a failed thing. Okay, the fatigue is just too high. All right, usually your second week is where you'll see your best gains. You'll see a lot of fitness manifestations, if you will, like strength will be better, right? You're starting, this is exciting. The week 3 is kind of a little bit of a grinder, right? The strength gains usually, and I'm not saying it'll happen all the time. I'm talking about an intermediate athlete here that needs this type of training, right? They're going to be a little bit slower. And then the deload is going to be warranted that fourth week. Now, you could overreach like I did here, okay? So I'm doing 4 weeks. Now, I'd have to have a purpose for this. Okay, I'm telling you, I've tried this. It doesn't work usually. And if somebody's working hard in these cycles and you're in the 80% range, this usually does not work. Okay, to go to a fourth, this fourth one will be a lot of pain and misery. If though you want to do this might be helpful if you're bodybuilding. So if we instead of percentages, we do this volume wise. Fantastic. Just be aware that this deload needs to be significant. Okay, so the more you push up fatigue, the bigger the deload. In fact, if this was an athlete that was really pushing hard here, maybe I had just a small recovery, I'd want to have 2 deload weeks, or instead of 7 days, 10 days, right? Make it significant. You could have this as a pre-game. If you're confident in the timing, you could have this as a pre-competition type of taper where you do push hard and then pull back for 10 days or longer. Okay, I don't like this type of construction. I don't like pushing athletes to the point they could get injured. I don't like trying to time things on a larger, longer scale. This may be warranted, though, in some cases. I'm not saying it isn't a tool, but it's a tool that I wouldn't use often. I have clients even that are just general fitness clients, right? And a lot of times, I don't want to do a deload week. And I'm like, sometimes you give them what they ask for, and it's like, okay, let's do a cycle without that fourth week deload. And it never fails, right? Like, I'm into the deload, right? And I'm not again, you don't have to deload if you're just starting out. I'm talking about people who've been training for a little while that, remember, periodization is managing fatigue and fitness and trying to, time them up. It's really management of volume in such a way that doesn't overreach the athlete, especially during peak times. Hope that's helpful. We could talk more about this. There are many other configurations. I try to keep it simple in this video. If you have some comments, let me know. If you'd like to hear about a particular topic, leave it in the comments. Hopefully you like this video, and I will see you in the next one.